There's a line that spoke to me very powerfully from this Gospel of John. It's Jesus' discourse to the Father, and he knows that he's ascending to the Father, leaving those behind. And he said, I guarded them, and I protected them, and not one of them was lost. And I began to think about being lost and the times in my life when I've been lost, both figuratively and literally. And one of the literal times came in the middle of a 30-day retreat. I was in Big Sur, California, staying in a hermitage high above the Pacific Ocean. It was a beautiful vista. I would look out and all I saw was blue water. And I had heard about 5 miles from my hermitage, there was a beautiful secluded beach that surely I should visit during my time there. So I got my knapsack together, I got water, I got sunscreen, I got everything I would need for the journey. And I had stayed at the Hermitage during the day, and so I left mid-afternoon for my 5-mile trek to Malera Beach. And so I walked along Highway 1 and went all the way down the coast there by Big Sur, and I finally found this beautiful Malera Beach. And there it was, in all of its stunning, breathtaking beauty. And I sat there and I prayed a long while. And I kind of lost myself in the thoughts and in the beauty of the vista. And then it started to get a little bit later. It was now late afternoon, and I noticed that it started to get a little dark. And suddenly I realized I still had a 5-mile walk back to my hermitage on the mountain. And so I quickly gathered my stuff together, I left the beach, and I started my trek home. But the darkness descended a lot quicker than I thought it was. And before I could even reach the path to lead up the mountain, it was pretty dark. And I began to go up the mountain, and suddenly, in pitch blackness, I didn't know where I was. And I still had the whole trek up the path to try to find my hermitage. And I found myself lost in the woods of Big Sur. And I was afraid, and I was in the dark. And suddenly I felt something swoop past my ear. And I thought, oh, it must be a bat. It was probably just a big insect, but when you're in the woods, you'd imagine anything. And I started to get really nervous and really afraid. And I began to pray, what do I do now? And suddenly in the distance, I saw what appeared to be 2 fireflies, except they were flying in such intimate parallel nature that I realized it wasn't fireflies at all because the light was growing bigger. And as it grew bigger, I realized they were headlights to a car. And so I began to run and move toward where I saw these lights coming toward me. And indeed, there was suddenly a road, and the lights to this car got bigger and bigger until it was suddenly next to me. And an old monk rolled down the window to a battered Toyota, and he said to me, "What are you doing in the woods in the middle of the night?" And I looked at him with relief, and I said, "I'm lost." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, not anymore. You're found. Get in." And I got into the car, and he looked over at me and he said, "Geez, you city boys." And he drove me all the way up the path to my hermitage, made me a cup of tea, and told me to go to bed. Well, do you know that when I saw him, he may as well have been picking me up and carrying me on his shoulders? So profound was that sense of being found, of suddenly realizing that I wasn't alone. The darkness was no longer scary because somebody else was there. And I'm reminded as I hear that gospel that that's what Jesus is for us. He says to the Father, not one of them was lost because I protected them. I was with them. And so when we feel ourselves to be in the dark, when we're on the mountains that seem insurmountable in the darkness or the daylight, when we feel as though we don't know how to find our way home, to remember that in the stillness, God says, I am here. You are not alone. You are never lost. You are always found.